In the small town of Cedar Ridge, Washington, a family of four that had once been seen as a model of harmony suddenly became the center of a case that shocked the entire community. There were no public conflicts and no recorded disputes. Yet in just one night, three of the four family members lost their lives inside their own home, leaving behind a scene filled with signs of violence. What really happened behind those closed doors? Who was responsible for this tragedy? And why was he able to act so coldly toward a family that had seemingly no known enemies? Their two-story house stood at the very end of Elmwood Drive, a street where children rode their bikes every afternoon and neighbors often left their doors open during the summer. It was the kind of neighborhood where people recognized each other by face, where weekend barbecues and casual greetings over backyard fences were simply part of everyday life. In the late afternoons, when the fading sunlight filtered through the trees lining the street, children could often be seen gathering to play ball in front of their homes while adults chatted on their front porches. Elmwood Drive was not the kind of place where shocking events were expected to happen. To the residents of Cedar Ridge, it was a peaceful neighborhood where life moved slowly and predictably. And at the very end of that street stood the Harper family home. To local residents, the Harper house was more than just a home. It was closely tied to the small pawn and jewelry shop the family had built over nearly 20 years. The store sat near the center of town, not particularly large, but always well-lit and familiar to generations of customers. Many people in town said that if you needed to repair an old watch, sell a piece of jewelry, or simply ask about the value of a family heirloom, Thomas Harper's shop was almost always the first place that came to mind. Thomas Harper, 39, was the man behind that store. He was known as someone straightforward and trustworthy in business. Regular customers often said that Thomas could remember every item they had ever brought into pawn, sometimes even recalling the circumstances that had led them to sell it. If someone was going through a difficult time and couldn't redeem their belongings on schedule, Thomas would often give them extra time without charging additional fees. To him, business was not only about profit, it was also about trust between people. There were even times when, noticing that a customer was truly struggling, he quietly helped them by offering a higher price for the item they brought in or by lending them a small amount of money to get through a hard period. Those gestures were rarely spoken about openly, but in a small town like Cedar Ridge, stories like that tended to spread quickly. Because of that, to many people in town, Thomas Harper was more than just a pawn shop owner. He was part of the community. His wife, Rebecca Harper, 32, was just as well liked. Rebecca took part in many local charitable activities. She frequently donated clothes, books, and toys to children in need. During holidays and community events, she also helped organize fundraising efforts for the town library and other local programs. Those who had worked with Rebecca remembered her as a gentle woman who always carried herself with calmness and kindness. Neighbors recalled that whenever she passed someone on the street, Rebecca was usually the first to greet them. She often asked about their families, their children, or the small everyday things that made up life in the town. For many people, Rebecca was the kind of person who made others feel comfortable from the very first meeting. In a small town like Cedar Ridge, where most people had known each other for years, the Harper family was seen as an ordinary, hard-working, and kind family. No one could have imagined that the quiet house at the end of Elmwood Drive would one day become the center of a case that would shock the entire town. The couple had two daughters. Emma, 12 years old, was a 7th grade student at the local middle school. Teachers described her as a diligent student, quiet, but highly attentive in class. Emma had a particular love for art. In her bedroom, she kept a small corner filled with colored pencils, sketchbooks, and drawing paper. Most of Emma's drawings were simple scenes, little houses, rows of trees, or pictures of families. After finishing them, she would often bring the drawings downstairs and stick them onto the refrigerator door in the kitchen. Over time, the refrigerator became almost completely covered with colorful sheets of paper, a small gallery that Rebecca proudly showed to anyone who visited the house. Neighbors remembered Emma as a polite and well-mannered girl. Occasionally, people would see her helping the elderly woman next door carry grocery bags inside, or walking the woman's small dog along the street. To many residents on Elmwood Drive, Emma was the kind of child whose presence gave adults a sense of reassurance. The family's youngest daughter, Ava, was only 9 months old. With her soft hair and curious eyes constantly looking around, Ava quickly became a familiar little face to many people in the neighborhood. In the afternoons, when the weather became milder, Rebecca often pushed Ava's stroller along Elmwood Drive. It had gradually become part of her daily routine. Many neighbors still remembered the baby's bright laughter whenever sunlight filtered through the trees and shone down onto the stroller. Sometimes all it took was a beam of light or a falling leaf drifting into Ava's view for her to burst into delighted laughter. For Rebecca, those walks were not only a chance for her daughter to enjoy some fresh air. They were also moments when she could stop and chat with neighbors for a few minutes, asking about their lives the way she always had. Life for the Harper family moved along in a steady and simple rhythm. Every morning, Thomas left home at 7 a.m. to head to the shop. Before leaving, he would usually stop by the kitchen, quickly finish a cup of coffee, and say goodbye to his wife and daughters. Rebecca stayed home with Ava during the morning. Around midday, once the baby had fallen asleep, she would often stop by the shop to help Thomas with a few small tasks, such as checking records or assisting familiar customers. Evenings were the time Thomas tried his hardest to preserve for the family. No matter how busy the shop became, he always tried to return home before dinner. To him, sitting together around the dinner table was the most important moment of the day. Thomas once told his friends, "There's no contract more important than dinner with my family." And so, each evening in the house at the end of Elmwood Drive was often filled with familiar sounds: the soft clink of dishes, Emma talking about her day at school, and sometimes the cheerful laughter of baby Ava from her high chair. On the evening of August 24th, 2011, a metallic sound echoed inside the house at the end of Elmwood Drive. The noise was brief and sharp, quickly swallowed by the silence of the night. There were no prolonged screams. No alarm sirens sounded. And no one in the neighborhood realized that just minutes earlier, inside that house, a tragedy had begun to unfold. For the people living nearby, that night passed like any other. Elmwood Drive remained wrapped in its usual quiet. Porch lights still glowed in front of a few homes, and from time to time the distant sound of a passing car drifted in from the nearby main road. No one knew that behind the closed doors of the Harper home, everything had already changed forever. The next morning, as the sun rose and shops around town began to open, one small detail caught the attention of a few people. The Harper shop did not open on time. At first, it didn't seem too unusual. Thomas occasionally arrived a few minutes late if something came up at home. But as more time passed and the store remained closed, some regular customers began to feel uneasy. Calls to the shop went unanswered. Thomas's personal phone could not be reached either. By late morning, a friend of the family decided to stop by the house to check if everything was all right. When police finally arrived at the scene, they were confronted with a sight that many investigators would later describe as one of the most haunting crime scenes of their careers. Inside the house, 3 members of the family were found in different locations. Every room bore signs of a night of chaos and violence. Furniture had been disturbed, signs of struggle were visible, and several details suggested that the confrontation had unfolded very quickly yet with devastating intensity. For those who witnessed the scene that day, it was more than just a criminal case. It was the moment when the entire town of Cedar Ridge realized that the sense of safety they had always trusted could be shattered in a matter of minutes. Amid that heavy and somber atmosphere, first responders made a discovery that left everyone frozen in place. Emma, the family's eldest daughter, was still breathing. She was found in an extremely weak state, nearly unconscious. Paramedics immediately carried her out of the house and rushed her to the nearest hospital in critical condition. At that moment, her survival was so uncertain that no one could say for sure whether she would make it through the night. But somehow, Emma survived that fateful night. And in the end, she, the only surviving member of the family, would become the most important witness in helping investigators understand what had happened inside the house that night. While medical personnel rushed Emma away from the scene, investigators began carefully examining the entire house. Their first findings quickly made the case far more puzzling than a typical robbery. There were no signs of forced entry from the outside, no broken windows, no evidence that any doors had been pried open. The doors appeared to have been opened in a normal way, as if the person responsible knew exactly which way to enter. The home's security camera system was also examined. Technicians soon discovered a striking detail. The system had been disabled for exactly 31 minutes during the night. No more, no less. After that window of time, the cameras resumed recording as if nothing had happened. This suggested that the perpetrator not only knew about the house's security system, but also understood how to temporarily disable it. When officers began checking the valuables inside the home, they noticed that some cash and several pieces of jewelry were missing. But what puzzled investigators even more was that many other valuable items, even ones worth more, had been left untouched. Other safes inside the house had not been opened. Several valuable pieces of jewelry were still sitting inside the display cases, exactly where they had been left. That discovery led investigators to begin asking a series of troubling questions. If this was a robbery, why had the perpetrator acted with such precision? Why was the security system disabled for only a brief period, just long enough for the act to be carried out before it was turned back on? And most importantly, why did every piece of evidence suggest that the person responsible seemed to know the layout of the Harper home in remarkable detail? Within just a few hours after the crime scene was discovered, news of the incident had spread throughout Cedar Ridge. In a small town where most people knew one another, this tragedy was more than just a criminal case. It quickly became a shared fear within the community. Many residents began asking the same unsettling question. If something like this could happen to the Harper family, a family so widely respected and well-liked, then was anyone in this town truly safe? Investigators began asking a series of pressing questions. If this was a robbery, why had the perpetrator acted with such precision? Why was the security system disabled for only a very short period, just long enough for the act to be carried out before it resumed operating again? And more importantly, why did it appear that the person responsible knew the Harper home so well, from the placement of the cameras to the exact locations of valuable items? Those details made the case far more complicated than an ordinary burglary. In the days following the discovery of the crime, unease spread quickly throughout the town of Cedar Ridge. In a small community where most people had known each other for years, the tragedy involving the Harper family was more than just shocking news. It left many residents feeling uneasy even inside their own homes. Some families began locking their doors earlier at night. Others installed additional security cameras. Conversations in the town's coffee shops and grocery stores all seemed to circle around the same question. Who could have done this? Many people believed that more than one person must have been involved. The way the crime had been carried out, the evidence at the scene, and the fact that the security system had been disabled led some residents to believe that the perpetrator could not have acted alone. Meanwhile, for investigators, the early direction of the investigation seemed to reach a dead end. There were no witnesses who had seen anything unusual on the night of the crime. No suspicious vehicles had been clearly identified on nearby roads, and the evidence found at the scene did not immediately reveal the identity of the person responsible. However, while collecting statements from neighbors and people who had done business at the Harper shop, a small detail began appearing repeatedly in different accounts. Several weeks before the incident, an unfamiliar young man had visited the store multiple times, claiming he was interested in buying watches and jewelry. At first, that detail did not attract much attention. Thomas Harper's shop regularly had customers coming and going. People stopping by to browse without purchasing anything was not unusual. But as investigators began piecing together the witness statements, they noticed one important pattern. The young man often stayed inside the store for quite a long time. He rarely purchased anything of significance. Instead, he spent most of his time quietly observing the surroundings. Some employees from nearby shops recalled that the young man often stood close to the display cases, carefully examining the expensive pieces of jewelry. But what they remembered most clearly was the way he seemed to study the security cameras and the layout of the store. One person even recalled that he appeared particularly attentive whenever Thomas opened the safe to retrieve items for customers. At first, those details did not seem especially important. But when investigators reconstructed the timeline of the days leading up to the crime, they realized that the young man had visited the shop at least 3 times within the month before the tragedy. 3 visits, 3 opportunities to observe the store, and then a crime carried out with unsettling precision. Using witness descriptions and images captured by neighborhood cameras, police began tracing the identity of the young man. It did not take long for them to identify someone they wanted to question. His name was Evan Carter, a 19-year-old who lived in a small town about 25 minutes away from Cedar Ridge. According to initial records, Carter did not have a significant criminal history. However, Some information suggested that he had recently been experiencing financial difficulties. Once Carter was placed on the list of primary suspects, authorities quickly moved to check his residence. But when officers arrived at his apartment, they discovered something suspicious. The apartment was empty. According to the landlord, Carter had left suddenly on the very night the crime occurred. He had taken a large bag with him and had not returned since. There had been no prior notice and no explanation. That sudden disappearance quickly pushed Carter to the top of the suspect list. At the same time, investigators began uncovering several other suspicious details. Large cash transactions started appearing in accounts linked to Carter amounts that did not match his normal income. In addition, a few pieces of jewelry matching the description of items missing from the Harper home were reported at a pawn shop in another town. Investigators quickly seized those items for examination. Another detail also drew particular attention. Carter's phone had been completely switched off just a few hours after the crime occurred. The last signal from the device was recorded in the early hours of the following morning after that. It disappeared entirely from the network. No phone calls, no text messages, no signs of any communication. To investigators, all of these pieces were beginning to form a troubling picture. A man who had repeatedly observed the Harper family's store. A man who vanished on the very night the crime took place. A man who suddenly had access to cash and appeared connected to the missing jewelry. At that point, the investigation shifted toward a clear objective: find Evan Carter and determine exactly what had happened inside the Harper family's home that night. Investigative units quickly expanded the search. As soon as Evan Carter was identified as the primary suspect, Washington State's entire investigative network was mobilized. Carter's communication records, social connections, and travel history were urgently reviewed. Data analysts began examining every phone call, every message, and every location signal from Carter's phone in the days before and after the crime. Their goal was to determine who Carter had been in contact with, which direction he had traveled, and whether anyone had helped him after he left Cedar Ridge. Washington State Police also coordinated with highway patrol units and federal agencies to broaden the search. Roads leading out of the state were closely monitored, especially routes heading south and those leading toward border regions. Information about Carter, along with his physical description, was quickly distributed to law enforcement agencies in neighboring states. Meanwhile, back in Cedar Ridge, investigators continued focusing on people who had close connections with Carter. Friends, acquaintances, former co-workers, and even individuals who had previously done business with him were brought in for questioning. Several individuals were found to have contacted Carter shortly after the crime occurred. Some were suspected of helping him find transportation. Others were suspected of providing cash or offering temporary shelter. There were also those believed to have known Carter's whereabouts, but had not voluntarily shared that information with police. A series of interrogations continued for several days. Investigators worked to determine whether Carter had truly acted alone, or if someone had helped him plan the crime or assisted him during his escape. Meanwhile, public pressure continued to grow. The Harper family had long been well respected within the community. Thomas and Rebecca were not only the familiar owners of a local shop, but also people who had actively taken part in community activities. Their deaths were not seen as just another criminal case. For the residents of Cedar Ridge, it was a shock that left many feeling as if their entire community had been wounded. Memorial gatherings soon began to appear. Residents placed flowers and lit candles outside the Harper shop. Questions about the perpetrator and the motive behind the crime repeatedly surfaced in local news reports. Under those circumstances, the pressure on investigators continued to intensify. After nearly a week of extensive searching, the manhunt for the suspect in the Harper family case entered a decisive stage. Fragments of information from phone records, traffic cameras, and statements from acquaintances began to fit together. Gradually, investigators were able to reconstruct Evan Carter's movements after the night of the crime. But one detail surprised them. Carter did not appear to have left the state immediately. Instead, he moved through several small towns in the region, frequently changing routes and avoiding major highways. He almost never used bank cards or any form of electronic payment. Instead, Carter relied mainly on cash and kept phone communication to an absolute minimum. To investigators, this suggested that Carter was deliberately trying to avoid being tracked. The search continued for several days, spreading across multiple regions and requiring coordination among several law enforcement agencies. Then, on the 7th day after the crime, an important lead finally emerged. Authorities received information about a young man matching Carter's description who had been seen near the southern border of Texas, not far from a crossing point into Mexico. According to witnesses, the young man had stopped at a small roadside store to buy food and water. While speaking with the shop owner, he was overheard asking for directions to a little-used route across the border. That detail immediately caught the attention of law enforcement. The information was quickly passed on to federal agents and Border Patrol units. If Carter was indeed trying to leave U.S. territory, the window to stop him might be measured in hours. Early the next morning, coordinated teams began monitoring the suspected area. Trails leading out of the border region were placed under close surveillance. Just a few hours after the operation began, a young man carrying a large backpack was spotted walking alone near a rarely used trail. His appearance matched the description of Carter. When Border Patrol officers asked him to stop for inspection, the man showed signs of trying to avoid contact and attempted to continue moving. After a quick on-site verification, his identity was confirmed. It was Evan Carter, the primary suspect in the Cedar Ridge case. The arrest happened quickly and without significant resistance. Inside the backpack Carter was carrying, officers recovered a large amount of cash along with several pieces of jewelry. After a preliminary inspection, investigators noticed that some of the items matched the descriptions of property reported missing from the Harper home. After days of an extensive manhunt, the suspect had finally been captured. But for investigators, the most important question still remained. What exactly had happened inside the Harper family home that night? Throughout the investigation and subsequent questioning, authorities ultimately reached a final conclusion. Evan Carter had acted alone and had no accomplices. However, what shocked many people even more was Carter's own statement. According to him, there had been no personal dispute or conflict between him and the Harper family. In fact, Carter admitted that in the past, Thomas and Rebecca had even helped him when he was struggling financially. That detail made the case even more difficult for many people to understand, and even more infuriating. Because in the eyes of the Cedar Ridge community, the Harper family had always been known as people who were willing to help others. And now, one of the very people who had once received that help had become the suspect behind her tragedy. So what was the real motive? That question haunted investigators, the Cedar Ridge community, and everyone following the case throughout the investigation. According to the official report from authorities, Evan Carter admitted that his original intention had been only to break into the house and steal valuables. After visiting Thomas Harper's shop several times beforehand, Carter had learned that the family kept jewelry and cash inside their home. In his mind, it was supposed to be nothing more than a burglary. A simple plan: break in during the night, take the valuable items, and leave before anyone noticed. But things did not unfold the way Carter had imagined. According to his statement during questioning, while he was searching through the house in the middle of the night, Carter was suddenly discovered by Thomas and Rebecca. In that moment, as he later described it, his thoughts began to spiral into chaos. Carter said that the worst possible outcome immediately flashed through his mind: being recognized, being arrested, and having to face the legal consequences of what he had done. That fear quickly turned into panic. During later questioning, Carter repeatedly mentioned feeling cornered, a state of mind that, according to him, left him unable to think clearly. He was afraid of being identified, afraid of being arrested, afraid that his future would end in that very moment. Amid the chaos, the crying of the 9-month-old baby echoed through the dark house. According to Carter, that sound only pushed him further out of control. In his recorded statement, he described a surge of overwhelming emotions: panic, fear, and desperation, a state that, he claimed, pushed events far beyond his original intention. Within just a few short minutes, a series of wrong decisions turned what had begun as a burglary into an irreversible tragedy. 3 lives were lost, not because of a long-standing conflict, not because of personal hatred, but because of the fear of someone who did not have the courage to face the consequences of his own actions. Meanwhile, Emma, the only surviving daughter in the family, had to begin an entirely different life. After recovering, she left Cedar Ridge and moved to live with relatives on her mother's side in another state. Emma left the town where she had grown up. She left behind the house that had once been filled with her family's laughter. The drawings that once covered the refrigerator door, the evenings gathered around the dinner table, the afternoon walks pushing a stroller down the street, all of it now existed only as memories. Memories that no child should have to carry for the rest of their life. According to family members, Emma gradually recovered physically over time, but the pain of that night remained. The memories of the family she had lost became something that would always be part of her life. Eventually, the case was brought to court. After a lengthy investigation and trial process, the court sentenced Evan Carter to 25 years in prison without the possibility of early parole. However, one crucial detail in the case directly influenced the sentence. At the time of the crime, Carter was still legally a minor. According to legal records, he was only 3 days away from turning 18. Because of that factor, the court was unable to impose the maximum penalty allowed under the law. The verdict quickly sparked a wave of public outrage. For many residents of Cedar Ridge, a 25-year sentence did not seem to fully reflect the magnitude of the tragedy the Harper family had suffered. Many argued that being only a few days away from adulthood should not have been the deciding factor that limited the severity of the sentence. Debates soon spread across news outlets and within the legal community. Some believe that the law must continue to uphold more humane principles when dealing with offenders who are legally minors. But others raised a difficult question. Do those legal limitations still make sense when facing crimes of such extreme severity? For that reason, the Harper case shocked people not only because of its violence. It also ignited a broader debate about the boundaries of the law, especially when extremely serious crimes are committed by individuals who are only days away from adulthood. A question that, even today, many people still struggle to answer. Years after leaving Cedar Ridge, Emma slowly began building a new life in the city where she had moved with relatives. The process of healing was far from easy. Memories of that night still resurfaced from time to time, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in quiet moments during everyday life. But over the years, with the support of family, friends, and mental health professionals, Emma gradually found a way to regain balance. Several years later, when she had grown older and felt strong enough to face the past, Emma made a decision that few people could have imagined. She wrote a letter to Evan Carter. In that letter, Emma did not hide the pain and loss her family had endured. She wrote about her parents, about her baby sister, and about the life that had been taken from her in a single night. Some of the lines carried frustration and sorrow. Some questions were asked, questions that might never truly have answers. But toward the end of the letter, Emma wrote that she did not want to carry hatred with her for the rest of her life. She explained that forgiveness did not mean forgetting what had happened, and it certainly did not erase the pain her family had suffered. But for her, forgiveness was the only way she could truly move forward. Emma wrote that one day, when Carter eventually leaves prison, she hopes he will choose to live a different life, a life of honesty and responsibility, where he faces what he has done and tries to become a better person. Because sometimes, the strongest way to close the chapter on a tragedy is not to hold on to hatred, but to refuse to let the darkness of the past decide the future. What do you think about this verdict? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow our upcoming videos. The stories we share in our videos are based on real cases from around the world and are presented with the purpose of providing information, analysis, and education. Through these stories, we hope viewers can gain a deeper understanding of criminal psychology, the serious consequences of violent behavior, and the importance of awareness and responsibility within society.